Hey friends, welcome back to another week of The Struggle is Real.
Because the struggle to talk about mental health and be mentally healthy is real.
The struggle is real.
Last week, we talked about all the different ways you can manage your emotions. And one of those was changing how you think, changing your perspective. So today, we want to talk a little bit more about that.
And specifically, we want to talk about how this all ties back into mental health. The theme of our video today is that sometimes our brains are real big jerks to us.
Our brain provides us with these different lenses to look at situations, and we can have a whole bunch of different lenses for any given situation. This is what gives us unique perspectives in our lives and in the situations that we're in.
I'm sure there has been at least one time in your life where you were in some kind of situation with a friend and you both walked away having completely different perspectives on what just happened in that situation.
My favorite example, the one that I was taught long ago, is imagine you're in an apartment building with tons of different people and a huge loud noise wakes everyone up in the middle of the night. One person wakes up absolutely furious. One person is terrified. And one person is like a little bit of curious and excited about what's happening. And those different people, based on what they're feeling, are gonna have totally different perspectives and thoughts running through their head during that situation. The angry person is gonna be like, oh, what the fuck, I have to work in the morning, what's going on? Scared person is like, oh my god, somebody broke in, we're gonna die. And the curious person might be like, oh, what's going on? Is somebody having sex upstairs? I don't know, but I wanna know. And so all of these people are having completely different perspectives on the exact same situation.
So obviously our past experiences are going to play a really big role in how we develop these lenses that we kind of project onto a situation. But another really important component is the emotion that you're experiencing at the time. We've been talking a lot about how our thinking plays a big role in the emotions that we experience, and that by changing our thinking we can change our emotional experiences. But we've kind of neglected to tell you that our emotions also play a big role in the thinking that we have. When we let our emotions distort our thinking and we're not aware of it, it can really mess up the way we see the world.
Remember how we talked about when we're having a big emotion, we start to think in kind of extremes, and so we're not actually seeing the situation for what it actually is.
So imagine you're walking on the street one day and someone bumps into you. If you woke up that morning and you were super excited about your life and just feeling great and looking forward to your day and all the people you're going to see, then you probably would be able to brush it off completely. You'd probably give them a little wave, you'd probably give them a little smile, and it all would be forgiven and forgotten and be totally fine. But if you woke up that morning and you were just dreading everything you had to do that day, the people you had to interact with, maybe you had some lingering emotions from the night before that you hadn't resolved, then you probably wouldn't be able to let it go as easily. You probably would immediately jump to some like anger and frustration, and you'd project that anger and frustration onto that situation.
When we're feeling a big emotion, it puts a lens on that situation, and so all of the thoughts that are automatically coming through our brain are gonna go through that emotional filter.
So if you're feeling super happy, you might be thinking, oh, that person was just distracted, they're looking at their phone. I always look at my phone while I'm walking, no big deal. If you're feeling super frustrated or angry though, you might think that person's so inconsiderate, the hell are they doing? Like, don't they know how to walk? Like, they should need to get a license to leave their house? Like, things would get really extreme in your head.
So why the heck are we even talking about lenses today? Why are you watching this? Well, this like thought-emotion connection that happens can actually lead to this really vicious cycle. We all get stuck in this vicious cycle of like thought, emotion. But what happens is sometimes we can't get out of that cycle and we get stuck in one lens.
I'm sure you can tell the difference between sometimes you just wake up and you're in a funk that day and nothing that anyone does can change that. You're just not going to be happy that day. Whereas there might have been times in your life where you were in a bit of a funk for like a week and nothing anyone did, nothing that happened could cheer you up out of that funk. That's the difference that we're talking about here. So how this cycle works is that when you're experiencing a negative emotion, you tend to much more readily come up with really negative thoughts. And those thoughts convince you that you should feel more negatively, which then make you produce even more negative thoughts. You can see how this makes a bad cycle.
While this is a totally normal human experience to get into this cycle, it can be really, really tricky to break out of that cycle. And this has huge impacts for our mental health. Because over time, the ways that we're thinking, our lenses can actually become like habits. So just like we have like behavioral habits like chewing our nails or twirling our hair, we don't even really notice that we're doing it all the time.
And the longer these habits go on for, the harder it is for us to notice and the harder it is for us to break out of them. So the longer we have these negative lenses on, the harder it is to kind of snap out of that negative filter.
Yeah.
Usually we explain everything in very like normal person language because that's how we kind of think, so it just helps us. But today we are going to use some psychology jargon because we've just decided that it's just the best way to explain what we're talking about today.
And you're wicked smart, so we know you'll understand.
Exactly. All the stuff that we've been talking about so far has a specific psychology term. It's called having a confirmation bias.
This is a habit that we use with our thinking, and it's where we search for evidence in our environment and in situations that confirms how we're thinking and how we feel.
These lenses really distort our thinking. So for all you savvy social media users out there, you've probably used Instagram before. And the same way that when you apply an Instagram filter to your picture, you're distorting how that picture looks. You're changing how the colors show up in that picture. And you can think of your thinking filters the exact same way. By applying this lens or this filter to your thinking, you're not allowing yourself to actually pick up all the objectively true things that are in your environment. You're only seeing things that go with that filter that you have.
And lenses aren't just true for negative emotions we don't really like, they also apply to positive emotions. So you can't just go around with rose-colored glasses thinking everything is always perfect and wonderful. You're gonna get into a lot of trouble. Like we all have that friend who immediately falls in love with the first person that they meet, and this happens every single time. They're like, it's great, it's wonderful, even though there's all those red flags. And in that situation, they're not noticing the important information in that situation. They're just seeing the positive things they want to see.
Exactly. They're refusing to identify that there's any negative things in that environment. And of course this applies to the emotions we don't really like feeling. So for sadness, if you develop that sadness filter, your mind is going to automatically look for cues in your environment that confirm that you should feel sad. And it's going to make you feel even more sad, and then it's going to make you look for even more cues that you should be sad. And the same thing's true for anxiety. If you ever start to get really stressed, do you ever notice that you start to see things in your environment that stress you out that maybe wouldn't have stressed you out before? It's because you developed this filter now where everything you see is confirming your need to feel stressed.
These lenses and how we see the world has a really big impact on how we see ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, and how we think about the world, which affects our mental health, our relationships, and basically just about everything.
Our entire lives.
Yeah. And so now we know these lenses are pretty important things. And what we need to do is become aware of the lenses that we might be using in different situations that aren't so helpful for us.
People in psychology love to come up with lists of things or categories of things, and so there are almost a gajillion different lenses that we could use to describe what we're talking about right now.
And they go by thinking traps, biases, thinking errors, there's so many different names for them. So if you come across any of them, it's basically the same thing. The 4 different lenses that we're going to talk about today are labeling, mind reading, catastrophizing, and shoulding or masturbating. For labeling, what we do is if we're feeling kind of crappy about ourselves, let's say we make a mistake or something crappy happens, we apply this single word about ourselves that's really mean. Like, we fail a test, I'm a loser, I'm a failure, I'm stupid. And those aren't very helpful or very kind. You cannot be summed up by one single word because you did one little thing.
We discussed labels earlier when we were talking about how it's so harmful to try and label someone with their mental health disorder. So why it's so harmful to say a depressed person instead of just saying a person who has depression. By applying a label to yourself, you're saying that nothing else about yourself matters and that is the only thing you need to know about yourself.
And there's no contradicting evidence to that label, but we know that that's not true. And how this lens affects our thinking is that once we apply that label, our brain starts searching out other evidence to confirm that for us. So it's like, oh, you think you're an idiot? Well, let me tell you about grade 2, grade 4, and grade 5. And so our brain is trying to help us by giving us evidence, but it's not making us feel better.
The second one we're going to talk about is mind reading, and you can pretty much assume what that means. It means when we read other people's minds. Except the problem is we actually can't read people's minds.
We're just pretending we have this magic ability.
Exactly, and the problem with this is that we create this filter that we see the world through where we think we know what everyone already thinks about us. And for most people, we're assuming people think pretty negative things about us.
And as a human being, if we think somebody is thinking something mean about us, it makes us feel really, really, really bad. But instead, if we thought that people were thinking wonderful things about us, like things that your best friend or your parents would think, then how would that make you feel? Probably a little bit better.
The way this affects that lens that we're seeing the world through is once you decide that you think someone thinks a certain way about you, you're just going to search out evidence to confirm your bias, as we've talked about. So if I decide that my supervisor thinks I'm an idiot because he never replied to an email I wrote, I'm going to start scanning my environment and my past and my future for evidence to support that.
The third one is catastrophizing, which is just like such a fun and dramatic word. And this is when you blow things out of proportion. If you know the making a mountain of a molehill, that's where this came from. And so it's like something happens that feels kind of stressful, feels kind of crappy, and you immediately jump to the worst possible case scenario that it could ever happen in the world. Fail an exam, never gonna get a job, drop out of school. How did you get to that? How did you get to that so fast? Our brain is very efficient at this.
A great example of this is in that movie Inception. If you haven't seen it, probably go watch it, it's pretty good. In the movie, they infiltrate people's dreams, and the way you know that you're in a dream is that if you try and think back to where it started, it doesn't make any sense. You can't trace back the situation to its beginning. And that's exactly what we want you to try and do with catastrophizing. Because if you end up at a conclusion that you can't rationally trace back to its beginning, then you probably know that you've been using catastrophizing.
We have to like ground ourselves, and so sometimes it's helpful to say it out loud and try to track how did I get from A to B, or talk to somebody about it, because then they might be like, what, how did you get there? And then it forces you to kind of ground yourself.
Exactly. So our last one that we want to talk to you about is one of my favorites, is shitting all over yourself or masturbating. And this is basically just applying expectations to your life and then judging yourself so harshly if you don't meet these arbitrary expectations.
And they're usually high expectations that no person could possibly obtain.
And these expectations tend to be things that we would never expect of other people. They're only things that we expect of ourselves.
So it might be like, in order to be smart, I must get perfect marks. How did you get to those conclusions?
And the problem with this is that if we fail to meet these incredibly high impossible expectations, we are so harsh on ourselves and convince ourselves that we're complete losers.
And that's not fair. You're a good person. We like you.
Yeah.
And you're smart. How this lens changes our thinking is that when things don't go our way, when one of our expectations isn't met, then everything is a total failure and we just like fall apart and we're so negative, and we search for other ways that we haven't met our expectations.
So, to sum up everything we've been saying, because we know it's a lot of information, we have some main takeaway messages for you. Number one, we have lenses that we see the world through, and these lenses have huge impacts on the perspective and the emotions and just how we feel about ourselves.
Number two is that we can get stuck in these lenses and we're only seeing the world through one perspective, which means we're losing some information.
And we're not seeing the world in a very realistic way. Number three, when our lenses get really rigid and we get stuck in them for a long period of time, it's going to have a huge impact on our well-being, including our relationships and long-term our mental health.
Our challenge for this week is becoming aware of the lenses that we use in our own lives. Because if we can become aware of it, then we can try to do things to change them.
So just to recap, those lenses that we talked about were labeling, mind reading, catastrophizing, and shooting all over yourself or masturbating.
And remember, you did not develop these lenses overnight, so you can't just snap your fingers and they'll be gone. What you need to do is practice paying attention to them and then practice changing them. And be patient with yourself, because it's hard to break habits.
So if you think you might be using one of these lenses that we're talking about, and you think it's giving you a bit of a hard time, a great way to punch it right in the face is by asking those 3 questions that we introduced to you guys last week. So the first one is what I'm telling myself true? A lot of the times we tell ourselves some really ridiculous things and they make us feel like garbage. The second thing is what I'm telling myself helpful? Even if it is true, is it worth focusing on right now? Last week we talked about how I could tell myself that I'm never going to win the Nobel Prize, and I might feel really crappy about myself about that. And you know what? It's just not helpful. It's just, there's no point in me focusing on that. And the third one was, if I was telling these thoughts to a friend, what would they say back to me? We are always so much nicer to our friends and family and loved ones than we are to ourselves. So try and channel that back to yourself. If a friend was talking to you, what would they say?
These lenses are really important for how we interact with other people. And so other people have lenses, and if they're struggling with mental illness, or you just can't understand why they're making the choices they're making, a really good thing is to take a moment and understand their perspective. What lenses could they be using? Because likely we're pretty frustrated with them. And if we can understand their situation, maybe we can feel a little bit of empathy and just be a supportive, caring friend.
Exactly.
And remember, a few weeks ago we talked about tea and mental health. You can offer to have some tea with your friend and talk, but they might not feel like they want to do that. Remember, check back in later, but don't force them to drink the tea.
Don't pour the tea in their face.
Don't tell them about their different lenses that they might have. That's not helpful. Just listen, just be there.
Exactly. You can direct them to watch this video if it's something that you think would be helpful for them, but telling people all the mistakes they're making is not a great way to help them.
Doesn't make them feel good. Thanks for coming back this week, because we know the struggle to talk about mental health and be mentally healthy is real.
But hopefully after this week, it's a little bit easier.